We live in this time where everything is so quick. We don't want to go through the whole process. How do we become rich tomorrow? And real estate done effectively, that's the opposite. Wealth development and building in real estate takes time.
There's a ton of deals out there. Yesterday we were in a meeting and I'm like, all right, I like this, but let's scratch the word perfect.
I feel like everyone's chasing these cap rates and they're looking for what's a good way to buy something. Everyone wants these really high cap rates. I feel like that's the wrong take if you're just getting into the business, is looking and going, man, I can't find a 12 cap deal in a reasonable MSA, so I'm out.
Welcome to this week's CashFlow Quest. Tide and I wanted to sit down and I'd say start at ground zero and kind of our current, knowing what we know today and what we've learned over the years on what we would tell somebody that has never seriously considered the space of manufactured housing, but probably considered wanting to have a rental home, a duplex, and or like multifamily apartments, maybe a 10 unit, 20 unit, 30 unit on up, where I feel like that's everyone that I know of that is kind of dabbled in rental real estate. That's where they go. And then you kind of tend to take a turn into like, okay, well, maybe I prefer some type of retail endeavor or like IOS was hot, which is industrial outdoor storage. And that became like a big thing because of the fulfillment of Amazon. And I call that the Amazon economy. So there's a lot of angles in rental real estate, but we're specialists in residential. We still do manage a 204 unit apartment community in North County of San Diego. So we keep our finger on the pulse there, but we love manufactured housing for a bunch of different reasons. And so we wanted to kind of just lay it out and then, be able to start an educational video series that caters to the younger entrepreneur or somebody that may want to be exiting from a business and deploying capital into a rental real estate play. So
maybe we start with like the benefits baseline of manufactured housing. If you're like a budding entrepreneur and know you want to get into real estate and you're not sure and you want to kind of know, the A's and the B's and the C's. And then we could go into someone who's already decided they want to start getting into the space and what advice we'd give them. I think one of the things that really sets manufactured housing apart from a lot of the other real estate types is we're specifically running the land. And so a lot of the management and organization of the home versus like an apartment complex where you're managing all of the renovations on every single unit, you reduce the size of that because most of your spaces are filled by residents who own their own home. So I think that's one of the things that we really like about the space.
And then coming from, early conversations about it, it was a really important fact for us when we were starting that if a single unit got beat up in any way from a storm or a resident trashed that house, worst case, you go buy another one single unit and put it back in that space and connect it to utilities. Cost you some money, but ripping out the flooring in the kitchen or fixing and rehabbing an apartment unit versus flooring a new or just buying and installing a new manufactured home in a space that goes vacant. The cost to do that is like you're going to replace the flooring, touch up and do the countertops and cabinets. Maybe you paint them. There's a whole thing on the value add apartments where that's going to cost you a serious, probably $15K a unit today, maybe 10 on the low end. High is a $20,000 unit turn for a multifamily apartment. Whereas 20 grand, you can set a new home. And as a dealer, I don't have to write a check for the house. I can floor that inventory in the community, pay the 20 grand. So similar out of pocket, but I just sell that manufactured home to an incoming resident and it goes back to just a normal occupancy and you fill that unit that went down. And so from a construction standpoint, we love that because let's say it gets flooded and it gets, just completely waterlogged or damaged to a level that you don't want to rip it apart. In an apartment, you don't have the option. You have to do the repair. So your hands are tied so much differently in multi. And multi is a great business. It's just, it's a higher cost on the expense load. When you look at the two side by side, you have a heavier expense load on operating apartments because of that. And so in our space, we work to get our expense ratios for properties that we've held 5+ years into the like lower 30s or even into the 20%, where the net operating income is the 70. And so that's a serious difference between apartments and mobile home parks.
Yeah. Also, if you have an apartment complex, all of your units are touching, right? They're like literally conjoined. And so, occasionally
your neighbor.
Occasionally, sometimes we have a resident who, lights their kitchen on fire because they're cooking in oil and they left the pot on boil or whatever. I mean, we have lots of communities. And if that happens in an apartment complex, you're fixing multiple units. And just from a personal experience we had in our apartment complex we manage, we had a main fire line burst.
This is actually a really good story.
And it happened at 3 a.m. and it shot 60 feet up into the air in a perfect arc into someone's open window on the 3rd floor, and it flooded 3 floors down. And so
was that person there or not there?
They were there, I believe. It was in the 2nd room that no one was in, but like it woke them up in the middle of the night. And bottom line is we had to fully retrofit 3 units, do mold abatement and testing to make sure that nothing grew. Like it just was this big thing that, normally it's if something happens out of the ordinary, it's isolated one unit in manufactured housing. Whereas in an apartment complex, if someone starts a fire on their unit, maybe the whole community's fire system goes on and now everything's soaked. And
now you have to fix that building altogether, whatever that whole building, that whole section of the property. And we lose probably about a home a year to, in manufactured home communities, 1 home a year to a fire. It doesn't typically burn the whole house down, but it catches a certain portion on fire, which kind of renders that home to us like you don't want to try to fix it unless it's minimal. And so we'll pull it and put a new home in. And we have crews come out, cut it all up with a tractor and some different tools and put it in a dumpster and haul it off, and we order a new one. So like that's a really cool piece of the business.
Yeah.
All right, but I want to go into baseline. So like you're wanting to deploy capital, or you want to consider raising capital to do a deal.
Okay.
Where do you go look for a deal? I have some thoughts on like how to go through this process.
This is a whole nother topic, but I feel like everyone's chasing these cap rates and they're looking for, if you start reading and doing some research on what's a good way to buy something, everyone wants these really high cap rates. And then they look in our space and they aren't really able to find them quickly, at least in the scale that they're trying to deploy. And I feel like that's the wrong take if you're just getting into the business, is looking and going, man, I can't find a 12 cap deal in a reasonable MSA, so I'm out, right? I think that if you're looking at it, you should be looking for, there's some really great smaller communities. I feel like that's the problem. People want to go institutional. They want the 100 space community. You have to earn that, and that takes time. And if you look at the 30 to 40 space communities, there's a lot of opportunities there where you can still find those higher cap rate deals and get in the game. And over the years, we've seen a lot of guys come who want to get in the game. They come to chat with you and they don't do anything because they can't find this perfect unicorn in the countryside. And I think that that's kind of it's a bad forecast for yourself, and it prevents you from actually drawing first blood.
I'm going to call this what makes a deal a good deal, because there's a ton of deals out there, and I agree with you. And yesterday we were in a meeting and I'm like, all right, I like this, but let's scratch the word perfect. Because perfect is a horrible goal when you embark on some type of journey, whether that, in this case, this is information. You're looking for a deal. You're looking for a piece of real estate that makes good financial sense. It's like, well, you when you're first starting, you want to just be in intake and learn mode to learn every single thing about the income and the expense and what it's going to cost to manage this thing, how to do it once you get in far enough. And then where is the meat on the bone? Where is the upside? How can you make this deal good? But then I'll backtrack to another guy that I follow for good multifamily. I'll shout out Ken McElroy, and he's a big time multifamily operator. I look up to him as a good example of somebody that's done it for so long that he's just really sharp. And that's where you can't just come in and be sharp and see the perfect deal shining. You have to understand the depth of what it actually is, how much income. But first off, it's the market. what location, what market do you want to be in? And so as much as I'd hate it to go back and like to paint the old rule as accurate, location is probably the most important. So you do a bunch of research and you should select your market. Ideally, you pick a market that has a decent amount of inventory so that you can, like, if you lean into that market and really get sharp on your research, you can find deals to look at and go through and tour and underwrite and potentially tie up, put in escrow while you go through a due diligence process. So, you go into the market. I'd say the more growth oriented the market is with a larger population, the better, because you're just going to have more padding on everything. You're going to have contractors. You're going to have choices for vendors. You're going to have more demand for the product in general. Like there's just so much that goes on with a thriving economy that gives you benefits across every single piece of it. We had properties in rural country outside of Durango, and there was like one guy to do everything. So if you pissed off the plumber, like, good luck. You got to call somebody in from Durango or whatever. And there's not that many good, hardworking guys in these small towns. So like everything's more challenging. And so there's just these like things that we've learned along the way.
I'm laughing over here because I'm realizing how expansive this topic is. And so let's just call this the kickoff, and we're going to have more dedicated one-offs to go through this. So we'll cover some high level stuff, but we could talk so much. So if we're looking at baseline, what do you want in a great trailer park? Number one, you just hit it. It's location. You have to have an MSA that's going to provide vendor flow, residents, all the things that you're going to need. Another thing that I really think is important on a first deal is really focus on utilities and getting a deal that has city services
and decent serviceable electrical, where it's not just tunneled everywhere and old. And in Arizona, they literally bury electrical cords. They're wires, they're electrical wiring, but nowadays you put it in conduit. Back in those days, they literally just dug trenches and dropped, rubber insulated wire in the ground. And so like those things you learn, and we've learned the hard way by bumping into things that cost a lot more than you'd ever anticipate. And so, yeah, like the location, because the top line, if you're going to break it down like 1, 2, 3, you got to have demand for the product. So like somebody recently showed me a deal, and I try to help anybody that wants to get in the space, and I'll give them a couple of pointers. Then it's like rural San Diego. And it's like, well, don't start there. If you get real sharp when you understand this town and it's about to boom because of X, okay, but that's still speculative. So you got to take it back. Where's your demand base for this housing? And so the more diverse the pool of people that are going to come in and need affordable housing in manufactured home communities specifically, the better off you are. And the more rent that you're going to be able to charge in the long haul, your rate is going to continue to grow. And therefore your top line and your gross income is going to continue to grow. So our top performing assets have been newer builds, so like the utilities and those types of things aren't beating you up on the expense side. And they're in good locations. So you have consistent demand. Your rental rates can climb consistently. Doesn't have to be home run because, time heals all wounds. You can start to grow and income after 5 to 10 years, at let's say 4 to 5% bumps. In 10 years, that's 50% more income. And then if you're able to manage your expenses really well, that deal's worth a ton more, at least double, if not triple the value than when you bought it. So you drive top line demand, top line income. So you need a good location. Then you minimize expenses. And that's important to have a pretty deep vendor base. Nobody likes to work in mobile home parks. That's just like a kind of something nobody really talks about.
Yeah.
You really have to build good relationships with vendors in mobile home parks because right now, good vendors, good electricians, plumbers, you name it, they're busy. They're busy enough with other work, and they can kind of cherry pick what types of properties they want to work on. So you need, the more people, the better, in my opinion, in a big demographic, a big metropolitan location, 1 million plus. We have a bunch of stuff in Tucson. We're going to do really well with it because of how we bought it, but it's way more, I'd say, difficult to hit huge gains in the markets that only have like a $500,000 to $1 million because you just have different dynamics in the drivers of that economy. Where Phoenix, Dallas, you probably, Houston, all these big markets, even if they have some different risks, each market's going to have its own risk. But the more people, the merrier, because you're going to have so many more options and you can continue to drive long-term revenue and it's going to grow. And so then, you get into, I'd say the third piece is the debt. And so who is a lender for that property? So like my lender, the first thing you do from his perspective is type in FEMA and he looks up the flood map and sees if the property is in flood, because that impacts who is a viable lender for that property. And it limits who potentially, if it's in flood, it limits who that lender is going to be. So then that limits your exit, so that impacts even if you hold it for 10 years, that impacts the buyer coming in. You're always going to have this, like, I don't want to call it like a salvage title car because it's not quite that bad, but it's kind of like a car that's been dinged and repaired. It's like, it's in flood. It's going to hurt our loan spread. It's only going to give us, it's probably like 50% of the options from a loan perspective. So your long-term growth is going to have a harder time on the exit. So you want to look at flood, look at your loan options. Ideally, like how we do it now is if a mobile home park does not qualify for Fannie Freddie, call it the agencies, for a non-recourse loan, whether or not we choose to take that loan option is sort of secondary. If it will quickly qualify for an agency loan, Fannie and Freddie, because the flood impacts that, only one of them will do flood. And so you look at the loan options, and if they'll do it, that means that property is in a location that globally is going to be successful. The credit risk from their standpoint, the lender is not as concerned about the long-term performance of that asset, to where it gives you like a quick way to measure the long-term viability of an asset. So if the agencies are like, oh no, quality, size, let's say it's most of the time your lenders, you can lean on them to do like $1 million loan amount minimum. That's pretty low. Most lenders don't want to spend the time on it, but if you get into the right mortgage broker, they'll do like $1 million to $1.5 million agency loan. And so you buy a deal that's just over that threshold to start, ideally, and or you buy a deal that will grow in value, but the agencies like it, it's just too small right now. So you can kind of do that. You can do the same third-party reports to qualify the lender, or that the agencies use to go through the process. And you can basically prove that deal to be long-term viable for an agency loan, which is the best non-recourse fixed rate product that's out there. For the most markets, they win and they do the most business. Well, so hold on. Let's went on a mortgage rant, but I was firing.
There's just so much, man. So it's like, sure, talking about it's like we have a lot of firsthand experience and pain that comes from this time. So let's paint the picture of who this consumer is. So either it's somebody who has $1 million liquid, or it's somebody who's in the rat race and they want to start making some, cash flow and kind of do it through some sweat equity. So at the very entry kind of level.
Yep.
And so that person, what are they looking for, right? So we've already established that you have to find a good MSA, but like if you were just starting today, you would totally buy a non-agency deal in Tucson.
Yeah, but I think that a really important point is to look at the long-term viability of that asset to the agency qualifications.
Okay, so
like you should look that up. I mean, probably Grok or ChatGPT can tell you what is an agency loan on in mobile home parks. Like it's not hard.
What would be some things that you'd be willing to take on for your first community? Because sometimes, and this is what my first point is, I feel like we talk to a lot of people who make that decision. They're like, hey, I've got $1 million, or hey, I'm sick of working my 9 to 5. I really want to figure this out. And they come to the hangar, they meet with you, they get a tour, then they're all hot and bothered. And then they stop by every 4 months for the next 3 years, telling you about all the different thoughts that they have, and they never do a deal.
Okay. So your first deal.
Deal.
So 20 units or more.
Okay.
In a metro that's $500,000 plus. So 500,000 people. Or 500,000 people or more in the metropolitan area.
Okay.
In a place that doesn't have rent control.
Okay.
Because like California is actually a good market as long as you do the research to know that you don't have rent control. Like there's a deal, anyone can buy it. It might still be there. It's in Fallbrook. It's a 50 unit deal and nobody's buying it because it's in California, and people like us don't want to buy a 50 unit anymore in a location like that. It just isn't worth the work effort for us because we're trying to buy hundreds of units elsewhere. But if you're new, that's a great starting point. Maybe too expensive here. It's like $5 million, which is why we started elsewhere. Okay. So 20 units plus. The more you go into, I'd say tertiary 500,000 population markets, the lower the rent's probably going to start at. So like when we were starting, like you can still find mobile home parks in like the $250 to $500 per unit per month range.
Yeah, we were just talking with the Sunstone guys, and they had deals in like Baton Rouge, and that was kind of like the market there.
And those markets are growing. Like, and so you look at, okay, this is just an old space rent, an old operator that hasn't gotten with the times. Let's say it's $300. We bump into those, and the market is probably all day 500, if not 600 in that same market. There's double the rent opportunity there. You know, that's unbelievable. So as long as you go in, let's say that's probably 30 to 50,000 a unit. So for 30,000 a unit, it's $600K for a 20 unit, you know?
Okay.
Did my math there, right?
So let's talk. So we've just established where you would track down and what kind of deal you're looking for. Now,
then city services,
definitely.
City water provided, you know, from the municipality, city sewer flowing into the municipality sewer treatment plant. You don't want to own that, especially on a small deal.
Well, hold on. I'm coming back to this. Hold on. Whoa, Nelly. All right. So we've established what we're kind of looking for. Now let's quick talk about loan sizing. So, because we're going to get into due diligence and tracking deals, right? So what we want our newbie to understand is what can they do with the money? And if they don't have the money, what do they need to raise? So what's loan sizing? Let's just use a 30 space park.
Well, first off, let's cover how do you find deals?
Okay.
Because like a million people want to dive into the weeds, but like I'm not kidding, I probably looked at 300 to 400 mobile home parks before I ever bought one.
Okay.
You know, and we would literally sit and like people talk about like, oh, it's like I've heard it like the dark work where you're doing things when nobody knows you're doing them. Like I used to literally be crawling around LoopNet, which at the time was the popular thing, and just looking at them, kind of doing some high level number crunching on the calculator, downloading some PDFs of their P&Ls, whatever was available, just to get an understanding. You need to spend a lot of time in the financial weeds and looking at potential deals that are for sale. And honestly, to this day, LoopNet's not bad. A lot of weird deals end up there because they're a little bit tricky in different markets. So look at them all. And then you just go through and hammer brokers that are in the space and start getting leads.
Well, let's dive in on that, because I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is that they go, you know what? There's this whole group of people who do this for a living all day long.
Yes.
I'm going to completely ignore them and start this myself. So this whole obsession with finding off-market deals, to me, it's like an afterthought. You should start with brokers and making great connections with brokers, because that's what they do. This is their whole job.
And they are working the sellers to sell at a fair market rate. And so like when you go off in the weeds and spend too much time off market, like sending letters, I get phone calls, letters, postcards, all sent to me trying to buy our mobile home parks. And I would never sell to them because I'm going to list it and get a bidding war. Like, so yeah, scratch the off market on your first few. If you want to bolt that on down the road to like basically be mining for golden nuggets, you know, these deals that are one off, we've only ever done one, and we've purchased 38 mobile home parks. And that doesn't mean that's how many we've done. How many I've looked at, it's in the hundreds, if not thousands. So only one that was like off market and was a steal. We bought it for like probably a half or 2/3 of what it was worth.
2 sellers, 3 parks. Got your Vegas and the 2 in Tucson.
Yeah, but I knew about those from brokers. So we sourced them later, years down the road. So our point is, make sure you start going to every event and make yourself known You got to set your deal target clearly, like let's say 20 to 30 units. There's a huge need. Like nobody buys those cherry 30 units.
And they're a no-brainer if you're just starting out. You tack them on.
And lenders love them if they're in decent locations, especially city services. And so that's where you start. And you should go to every manufactured housing event or, multifamily event, whatever. But you got to define what you're after and then stick to your guns on what your criteria is until you learn to then adjust it over time. But some of the best things we ever did was just be so persistent in our focus. And people told us I don't know how many years, 5+ years. Oh, there's not going to be any deals in Arizona.
Oh, they still say that.
Well, and they're not wrong in bulk. But if you focus in Arizona, now we know every deal, like a deal that comes around. I typically know the name, know roughly the space count. I know of the seller, because we've been so focused in that area. And so you need to go really deep in your knowledge base and I'd say the persistent long-term focus of that 20 or 30 unit that's in a good location because they're around and they'll come up.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head. And I think that this alludes to the bigger picture within real estate. We live in this time where everything is so quick, fast paced. We want it now. We don't want to go through the whole process. How do we become rich tomorrow? And real estate done effectively, that's the opposite. Wealth development and building in real estate takes time. And so the reason why we get shots at these deals now, these are the same deals that we were told we would never have a shot at, are because we bought smaller deals and grew wealth over time and earned a track record. So if you're just starting out, I think it's a great place because those deals are to be done. There's not a ton of people buying 30 and 40 space parks. And there's a lot of great deals that can be had and you can really get into the space doing that.
So once you find a decent deal, let's say you find a 30 unit that you really like, it's under $1 million. It's like, it seems to be a great deal. And it checks the city water, city sewer. The electrical seems to be in fair condition. We've actually grown to like overhead poles because it's easier and less expensive to repair, even though it looks worse. Unless it's a newer build community, we like overhead fed electrical.
So we're hopping into DD.
So, but this is also like a quick litmus test. You got 3 main utilities, depending on if you have gas, there's 4. Like that's the quick, literally it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you have that, then you go to lender. You look at the income, you look at the expenses. If the rent is cheap and it's a good deal because the rents are under market, let's say it's under $1 million. Okay, so you're going to take that to several banks that are in that region, maybe in Arizona, like let's say a Tucson, like your hypothetical. Okay. You find a 30 unit in Tucson in a decent location in Tucson. You want to buy it. And it's $900K.
Okay.
And it checks the utility boxes.
Also, real quick, the offering memorandum from most of these brokers are going to have the cliff notes of the utility infrastructure. So you find the deal in your price bracket. You've been talking with this broker. He sends you the offering and it says city services. And, he asks, well, what's going on with the electric? Oh, they redid it 5 years ago and it's good. Like, boom, you have that. Now you're going to the lender.
So you're basically kicking off your due diligence now to make sure everything is real that you've been told. So you start to pull financials, profit and loss statements for probably the last 12 months is what the lender's going to ask for at a minimum. And then you're going to want to have up to 2 to 3 years at least of financial data for your background just to go kind of through and audit it. But the lender wants a T12, which is the last 12 months. They want to look at the income, the expenses, and they're a good, quick kind of help through your learning experience because lenders aren't stupid to this game. And brokers tend to scrub the expenses to try to wiggle the price up and get net operating income higher. And so you got your gross income. That's your total rent collection, maybe plus some of the utilities you bill back for or something like that. Pet fees, you name it. And then you have all your property level costs. So you are going to have to pay a certain amount of electrical, water, sewer, or maybe the bulk comes through you. On these smaller deals, a lot of the times you get the main bill and then you're submetering to the 30 units. So you have these expenses. You have to, fix the road, potholes. You have to fix plumbing repairs, make sure any leaks or any sewer blockages get repaired and cleaned out. So you have expenses. I've literally been told that parks don't have expenses.
Yeah. So I mean, at this point in time, we've tied the deal up.
You're probably really considering making an offer or already have.
Yeah. Sometimes the brokers have like a pre-DD packet that they send, like a Dropbox that has a lot of this information. And so maybe you're in this point in time.
This is what I would call like the underwriting phase. So like if you're like looking for a first deal, we covered that. This is like you're learning to underwrite a deal. And it's what the lenders do. And so like we say all the time, all right, we'll drop it in the model. We'll underwrite it. We'll get back to you. That's kind of the cursory glance for us. And we do dive into the financials.
If you're brand new, this is your first deal, for example, how would you recommend somebody get a model and educate themselves on how to effectively underwrite a deal? So I know that's a very complicated question.
It's actually really simple now. If you back in my day,
I'm just saying our models have gotten substantially more complicated,
but they don't need to be.
Okay.
You literally need like basically a T12, and then it looks like a T12 for however many years you're looking. You do 1 year, one P&L per year though, instead of the monthly breakout. So you can go online, you literally can type in like multifamily underwriting model. I don't even know if you have to buy it. You can you can click download and it opens in Excel with a model.
Okay.
And that's where like some people like hide their model. Now it's like you can get great models everywhere. Michael got one offline and then just manipulated it for our space.
Okay.
To be more specific to some of our tailoring that we like to do. So you grab a model offline, that's in Excel, and you just start plugging in, okay, how many units? 30, this amount of rent. What are the expenses? Whether it breaks it down price per unit, per month, per year, whatever. You can look at the totals and it's like, okay, this is let's say it's, I'll just run some quick math so I paint a decent picture. So let's say it's a 30 unit times $500 space rents. Okay. So your collection is $15,000 a month.
Okay.
So then you type that in, obviously it's monthly, and then you just have a yearly factor that is times 12. So you're looking at $180,000 top line gross income, and this is no utilities.
Okay.
So you take that number, then you'd look, okay, there's my top line. Where are rents going? So there's where you have to decide on a hold, whether that's 5 years, 10 years. You have to look at each year. So you start to put in factors. What's my rent increase? If it's $500 and you do a bunch of market study and it should be $700, you know that you want to get to $700 as quickly as possible. So you'd plug in a factor. Maybe it's 5 or 10% a year and on your way up. If you can do more, great, but I'm just throwing numbers around. So then you would plug in the 180 would be increased by that percentage. So they go from 180 and it'd be times 0.05. So you'd go up, 0.005. So you go up $9,000 a year. So then the next year it's be 189 and it just starts to step up. Then you look at expenses. So you kind of program the income, then you go to the expenses, you look at what's historic. What's nice about this moment right now is you're gathering all the data. In my opinion, you start the conversations with your lenders, especially when you don't know a lot yet, because the lenders have looked. All these people that work at the banks, they do loans all the time. So they help you learn.
Right.
And it's like, oh, do you have a personal financial statement? And like literally like it was like, oh, yeah, okay. Well, so what do you need?
Yeah, like I've seen a few of them. So like, how do you want instruction?
Literally, they all have their own forms.
Yeah.
So lenders will send you personal financial statements that are literally like fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And that's how we started. Yeah. Like I literally made that in my own first financial statement going into the first bank loan we ever got. So you learn that, then it's like, okay, well, what would you do loan to value? Oh, it's max loan to value, this and that, 75%. We'd probably be looking at like a 2 or 3% over the treasury or whatever metric they're using. And so that they teach you a lot. Then they get the numbers, right? So you have the initial call. You start game planning more on the global standpoint of what they would be willing to offer loan terms, but then you send them the financials and they start asking questions,
which is helping you. So just a quick recap. Basically, we've determined our market and found a park through a broker. on the OM, and after discussing with them, they've now sent us some cursory financials, and now we're shopping it with, you said start at localized banks, and then maybe if it qualifies for agency, we're interacting with someone on that side.
Well, $900K, you're looking for a $500,000 or $600,000 loan, so you're out of the agency.
Okay, so now we're dealing with like a CMBS type.
I would consider banks like first.
Okay.
Because especially local or banks that have a presence in a lot of the towns in that state.
Okay.
They're going to understand it, and they're going to be a good long-term resource for you to grow your knowledge base off of. And they're good old boys, right? You're not talking to these big lenders. Not saying you don't also make a relationship with mortgage brokers, because mortgage brokers can teach you a lot and they can go shop it around. And I think that you should, but that's not easy coming from ground zero.
Right. So we're in ground zero. Now we're talking with our local lenders, and we're starting to get holes punched through the financials that have been given to us by
the brokers.
The brokers.
And the brokers are painted poorly here, but I don't mean to. It's just,
we love our brokers.
It's just the fact that you don't want to trust fully. It's like, hey, you can take everyone's word for it and know that they're not trying to screw you, but you shouldn't automatically trust a broker's underwriting. Yeah, trust but verify. And so you look at the numbers on the expenses. Let's say the expense load on a small deal like this is 25%. You and I know that it's a small deal.
Something smells.
and so with the smaller the deal, the expenses are going to be quickly swung up in percentage. And so if it's under like 40%, I would say off the bat, you should beware. Just look into really learning what it looks. That's where you hey, in this category of deal, you're probably not going to have sophisticated financials, which is actually a good thing. It's an opportunity zone. And so you need probably to have them send you bank statements showing the owner's transactional, basically the GL, but they don't do it that way. They have a bank statement so that you look at the income that they're collecting for the deal and the expenses going out. And that's where you'll find all the bodies buried in the numbers, where it's like, well, what happened here? You spent 10 grand fixing the sewer line. And like, oh yeah, but that never happens, and now you're talking more directly with the owner or I should say the seller of this property, to where you start to learn. Now your lender's starting to ask really good questions, and you're starting to triangulate the fact that like, oh, the expenses really should be 40%, whatever it is.
Okay. So now that we have a set 40% expense load and we've put this into our model and we see that it pays out what we are trying to get as our first deal, now we're tying this deal up.
Correct.
Right. So we're sending a letter of intent, getting it tied up.
And you probably have already sent a letter of intent. And so all of this is like, you're sending a letter of intent. You're maybe fielding phone calls from the broker to kind of negotiate some points. Meanwhile, you're starting the conversation with your lender. What else did we cover there? You're kind of just doing cursory like checks on the utilities, what's there. Maybe you're going out to drive it. Ideally, you have seen it with your own eyeballs when you send the letter of intent, or at a minimum, but the broker's not going to take you that seriously until you've seen it with your own eyes before they really consider going to purchase agreement and or contract and escrow with you, because they are going to want to make sure that you're not just kicking tires and wasting everybody's time.
We've actually won pretty big deals because we had gone out there and there were big operators that had not been to the property. And that was like, basically, even though we're all kind of at the same number and some had better reputations or bigger reputations than us, we got it because we had physically been there. And yeah, so let's just quick talk the drive. You're driving a mobile home park. You're looking at it and checking it out. We talked a lot about utilities. A lot of utilities are totally visible. I just drove a community that a broker had sent to us that was right in our favorite market. And I'm driving and I can see on poles that it's like rusted, master metered electric in really rough shape. Like I can just tell that it's a problem. They're 30, 50 amp houses. And so that's an issue. Is it a slum? Or is there junk everywhere? Like these are the kinds of things, because if you buy this deal, now you're cleaning it up. You're going through this.
I call it the RP. You're the responsible party when escrow closes. And so to your point, we have a quick rule of thumb. We've hit our max density, and we've gone over it and then sold those deals off over time. And so our max density is 15 single wides to the acre,
which is a lot,
which is as tight as you ever should buy. Because If a home burns, floods, gets broken, gets aged out, just is super old and you end up with it. And it's like, this thing's going to cost me 20 grand and it's a 1960 trailer. Yeah, to hell with it. You chop it up, throw in a dumpster and you bring a new unit in. Well, in order to bring a new unit in, the density has to allow you. You can't have I know the deal he just drove. It's in Phoenix. We like the location, but the density was beyond our limit and all the homes were tied together with rooftops. Basically carports completely enclose everything to where if one home goes under or whatever it has to be ripped out and you have to replace it. It's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah. So once we get into DD and going through the final process of the lender, underwriting, you're going to be touching on zoning. And so most of the communities were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so they have these non-conforming use grandfathers that basically allows them to operate as a mobile home park in the city vicinity. But when you're installing new inventory, usually you have to meet the setbacks. And if you have houses that are on top of each other and they were, homes from the late 60s, early 70s or, 8x31s, you're not going to be able to fit one in with modern code, modern setbacks. And if you are, you're not going to be able to have parking. You're going to start running into some issues that make it hard to occupy and sell the home later.
And we've had these communities that are so dense that we had to sue the city for grandfathered setbacks because they always want to push the latest safe setback requirements that are code. And so we had to sue the city because we literally were going to not be able to refill the space with a newer home, even though it would be a park model and as narrow as you can buy them today. And so once we did, we got the approval. We ended up able to put newer or used park models that were, within 10 years old into those spaces. But that significantly limits, as you can tell, you're kind of getting squeezed here on your ability to execute and infill a new unit into that space.
And quickly, you might be dealing with this municipality for a year to get that figured out.
So the more you can kind of steer clear of super dense deals, the easier it is to infill and bring in a new unit to that mobile home park. The other thing is it's really difficult to take these old mobile home parks that are significantly, metal on metal, 1960s plus homes where they have carports everywhere. When you now want to do anything to clean it up in appearance and make it nice and clean and organized, you're really limited. It just is what it is. You can only do so much, especially if you don't own those homes. Those are homes that are owned by other people. And so we've passed on a few decent deals. Long-term, I know of some deals that I've passed on in good locations where the guys that will buy those will make money. But we've chosen to operate communities that are 1 to 2 star to begin with is the low end, and then we want to take them to 4 stars. When you have these metal on metal and shed roofs everywhere, parking structures, tying everything together, it really is long-term going to be too challenging to untangle the structural mess that's gone on there to make it tidy enough for what our standard is now. And so that's, I'd say, a long-winded way of saying you just don't want to have too many homes too close together.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree more. So now we've driven the park. It doesn't look perfect, but it's got potential. It's kind of cute. There's no huge red flags as we drive through the park. And we have a bank lender who has punched holes in the expenses. We've brought it up from the 25 we originally quoted to a 40% expense ratio. And we're feeling like we're ready to go. So it's time to tie this deal up, go to contract, and go through the full DD process. So obviously, we've talked about this in other podcasts. The most important vendor that you can have as a mobile home park operator is a good attorney. And so you guys had a little bit of experience, but if you've never done this and now it's your first shot, what do we do? What are we looking for to fill out this contract and make sure it's legit and kind of guide us through, the structural formation if we're raising through a syndicate or whatever we're doing? How would you start from a legal standpoint?
So when you're starting, I would lean on the draft purchase agreement to come from, let's just say, a broker that's been in the industry, right? Ideally, you're going to have some type of broker or somebody that is a third party. And that's another good reason to not go direct, especially on your first deal.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know enough yet. And so it's nice to have a broker that can provide a draft purchase agreement, even if it's not perfect. This is like you're still in keep it simple mode, where you take that and you go to your real estate attorney that you're just kind of forming a relationship with, and you play super dumb and just go into learn mode, and you let them walk you through this purchase agreement. And even if there are a few things that they'd like to tailor, you should try for representations of the buyer versus the seller. But I wouldn't overcomplicate the purchase agreement. Keep it simple. Hopefully the brokers typically don't like really complicated forms either, because it makes their life miserable, and no good deals come together on these really long contracts. So keep it simple, figure out baseline what you need, and then don't make a big deal out of the purchase agreement. At the end of the day, you want to protect yourself enough, but don't break deals over purchase agreement negotiations. And always lean on your broker when you're early and into the space, because they can help you understand what's market, and you can then decide to take the risk. I'd say that's an interesting point, but most people get caught up in the weeds on legal. There's a moment where you have to jump.
Yep.
Especially on your first few deals. Like, you have to understand the risk, but then realize, like, okay, I'm taking this on. I'm not going to go sue the seller for something that I've bought. And that's just not how I am. If they were hiding something blatantly that comes out later, but at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to do the due diligence, the environmental, have a survey done, understand the whole thing, to where it's a long-term game and there are some risks involved on the front end.
So if you don't have any experience and you are just getting into this, I think the first attorney I would get is an LTA, a landlord-tenant attorney. There's usually great ones that you can get from the local associations. And the reason why I suggest that is because, like, for example, we have a total killer when it comes to our contracts who specializes in deal formation. However, you really want a Swiss Army knife if you're just starting out. And most of the landlord-tenant attorneys have enough wherewithal to where they could help glance over this PSA and give you a blessing. Another thing that they do, for example, when we were doing business with, before it was Zona Law, Williams, Zimmern, and Parham, our attorney, Melissa, had a really wonderful due diligence breakdown that I, had gathered and sent to you guys as a secondary check on what our processes are. So if you're not really sure, now you're entering this due diligence phase that we've been alluding to for a little bit now, you're about to go into that. You might not know everything you're looking for. And so it's a really good starting place where they're going to be able to tell you what to look for in the contract and now what to look for in requests for documents. And later, once you take over, they're going to make sure that you have rules and regulations, good leases, and can represent you from anything that you run into with evictions and dealing with local municipals, anything. So that's probably the first person that you're going to touch base with.
And you're going to need an attorney for the tenant
absolutely
items. So if they can help you if you can pay them per hour to kind of download on you on like how most people have LLCs to hold these, mobile home parks, and you can learn a lot. And then whether or not they can actually do that work or they will agree to is another thing. But you're going to need somebody to help you with the leases and make sure you're doing things legally on the operational front. So that's a good point.
Right. So we now have a PSA that's signed, sent, and accepted, and we're going into due diligence. So this is really where the cookies are made. This is
a lot of work to get a deal in escrow, and then you're like, oh, now the real work begins.
Yep. So usually it's what I've seen historically. I feel like it's been changing lately, but it's always seemed like it was 30, 30, 30. So you had like 30 days of due diligence, 30 days to figure out financing, and then like an extension to close. You would hope for 60, but you have 90 if you need it. So you got 30 days. We've already done the drive-through. Now, the first thing we're doing, because it usually takes the full month, is getting plumbers, electricians, any type of engineer that you're going to need to go out there and actually physically and formally inspect utilities to verify that offering memorandum was accurate and that you agree and that they aren't finding that there's Chernobyl underneath the sewer system.
So a phase one. So you basically have to spend some money on some pros. We've done it where we didn't out of ignorance. We didn't hire a plumber to come out and scope the sewer lines. We've done that pretty regularly, even since the beginning. That's a pretty easy one to find somebody to come scope the sewer. Understanding the water lines, what the risers are coming up out of the ground as. In Colorado, like you look at the galvanized pipe and it's like, if it looks like you could kick it over, it's a red flag that like the risers are at a minimum. The risers are that old galvanized metal pipe. So you're looking for like, okay, have they been dug up and you have plastic pipes coming up to connect to the homes. Like you're looking for just things. And I mean, we're talking about just walking around the park with your eyeballs looking. It's not rocket science.
And I wouldn't get too hung up on the actual infrastructure material unless it is asbestos or Orangeburg. But what you're looking for is the pros to tell you the age and quality, right? Because like, for example, we've had parks in Colorado where there's a lot of water in the soil, a lot of big trees. Having clay in your sewer is a problem. But in Arizona, where it's desert, really great drainage, some of these are perfectly preserved. Is it our ideal type of sewer system? No. But is it something we wouldn't buy a deal over? Definitely not.
No. And in Arizona, every location has a different animal. So like in Arizona, you don't have these tree root issues to the same degree because It's like a lot of palm trees and they just don't do that.
Or cactus.
Yeah. So whereas Colorado had these, what were the big cottonwood trees?
We had big cottonwood trees in a park that.
And so they were punching holes in the clay sewer lines consistently.
Yeah, it was a big problem. And the park was very old. This was our entry, 28 spaces. And the park only had 2 cleanouts when I first started managing it. Yep. And so the snakes never would reach around to clear the line to knock the root out. So then they have to cut the main, drop a new clean out. It was always a total nightmare.
That had city sewer, but it was on the well water. And it was in town with water in the street. And the city would hold the water hostage. Basically, anytime we asked for it, they would just beat us up with a bunch of weird violations on like the residents and raise the price.
I know.
And so we never did it because it was like they just kept pushing the price up. Anytime we tried to get square up on connecting the system to city water, they would just double the price. It was crazy.
I think that when I first started, the quote was 70, and when we sold the deal, it was like $450,000 for a 28 space.
And just the hookup fee. So then you had to actually do the work. And obviously you have water lines in the ground, but you're going to put a lot of pressure to them.
So then you have to bring it up to modern code.
We were going to have to put a whole new water system in that park. And so we decided to sell it.
Yeah.
And so we operated with a well and had nightmare scenarios. I'll never forget being basically 911 was calling me in the middle of the night because they didn't have water. Like, I mean, I was getting like these unknown calls, I'm like, oh God,
this is the FBI.
It was always police getting called on our behalf because something happened with the well and the well went down, and meaning like it broke and the park had no water. And so the whole reason why we preach now city services is when you're providing water or sewer
or power,
or you have a master meter power, or you own the gas, like basically the less responsibility you have over the providing of the utility functions, the better. Because they would call me because I was legally required to provide water to these residences, these mobile homes. And so they would chase you down if you didn't have water. And it's a big deal. I mean, if they could choose to come after you and like heavily fine you for a lack of your responsible and your duties to these people that are residents in your community.
And the company had, one of the first things it did was fully rebuilt and retrofit the well system to code. And so what ended up happening, I think there was a resident that had like a small orchard in their backyard, which is more reason to make sure you're doing inspections. But like
and we had a plumbing, like basically every time the well ran out of water, we had a leak somewhere.
You had a leak, or you had them overusing water and not being, reasonable with it. And so, yeah. So bottom line is, you want to make sure you're going through a good due diligence on your utilities right out the gate, because you're going to be sending out vendors, you're going to be sending out people to assess the system. And then you need that feedback back before you can basically negotiate if you do find a problem. I would also recommend, this is one of the rookie mistakes that I've made many times and will never do again, but you don't want Roto-Rooter for $700 to go out there and have some kids scope one thing and then write, yeah, it looks good. You want, we pay for some really high-end people to go out and do this. But if you're trying to do it on a budget, because this is your first deal, it's a small deal, getting a good plumbing group or electrician or whoever the utility is.
More of a good old boy plumber can actually go scope it and then teach you, hey, and then you can be like, hey, what do you think? Should I buy this thing? And you can just ask dumb questions, and they're not just some tech for a Roto-Rooter.
Exactly. You want Jeff's Plumbing, and Jeff came out there and spent 8 hours, going through and scoping it and goes, it looks really good, but this section's kind of bad. And it's made out of ABS over here, but there's some clay pipe over here, and the water risers are galvanized, but they seem to be doing good. I'm getting good flow. You want that type of person going out there. So first things first, we've knocked out utilities. We're also getting into the paperwork. So this is where we're getting, if we have it from QuickBooks or from whatever management system they're using, a full GL dump. We're getting bank statements.
Or bank statements, whatever it is. Whatever you can obtain, basically, to prove the financial records are accurate.
Copies of all the utility bills.
All the leases.
Every single lease. You're going through them. You're checking. Also, when you're driving the community, at this point in time, you've already done a cursory drive. But this time you should be really doing a drive. You're looking for, is there vacant houses here? Because a lot of times we see that. You are physically counting every space for a park you're buying, because oftentimes there's a double wide somewhere, or they eliminated a space. I've seen where they've taken single wide spaces and put 4 RV plugs, and they count it as 4 spaces, and now they're trying to sell it to you by the space. There's all kinds of stuff. So you want to make sure you're counting and agree to your space count. You're really going. It
goes down to like common sense. Just go take inventory. What's there? Look at every electrical connection, plumbing connection for a house. It's like, okay, that's a unit. Yep, looks good. Next, and you just go back to common sense through that whole process.
Yep.
And go ahead.
Walking units. So, if it comes with, it's a 30 space park, if it has 5 park owned homes, you want to be checking those out. You want to be going through, making sure that, we've had some situations where we buy a community and then 5 people the first month move out, air quotes. Then we go into the unit and it's a shell, so you want to make sure you're not getting these. And I've heard stories of houses being painted and they're empty on the inside, et cetera. There's some crazy stories.
You're kind of doing body checks. You want to see cars. You want to see that it looks like somebody's living there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you go to the bank statements or the GL.
Yep.
To prove like, okay, you say that there's 27 occupied out of 30, or 27 times 500 actually paying.
Yep.
And it goes back into almost like a quick forensic audit of just like, okay, yes, what's what? Okay, those 3 are coming with the mobile home park. Those 3 units, either vacant pad or a home. You go tour it, you see it. Okay, check. It's a whole, it really is interesting as we're diving into this, how much common sense just comes out when you go through this portion. Don't try to do it with AI. Don't try to do it with computers. Just go.
Just do it. Just actually do.
Like, don't try
job.
to buy cameras and, model it with face recognition. Like, just keep it simple and go through the process. Takes a day, pretty much.
Takes a day for what specifically?
A day to go do the tour.
Yeah, definitely.
Like one day. You go out there, you learn about it. You maybe have a maintenance guy that's out there that's done some work, whoever that they have that's been helpful. But just know that you want to be trusting, but verify everything. I've had sellers just blatantly lie to my face in person.
Yep. Or you've had sellers that don't even know, right? They own a bunch of parks. They have no idea that there's this problem. And I mean, we see that all the time where it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I'm going to yell at somebody on my team. Like,
Yeah. So then know that you're building now your reputation in this business, whether that's with your vendors, your good old boy plumber, electrician, everyone that you're really trying to build a good team. Note that you're building a team, and there's no way around it. There's no way around building a team. You have to lean into being a good, respectful person in the industry, so now you're the owner, or you're going to be. So now you need these vendors to like you and like working with them, and they want to help you because you're paying them on time. Like, there's just a lot to that long-term reputation. And then you're verifying on the seller. If there's something rogue that you find, like some broken, what was it? We had a sewer line that was backed up this last year and everyone freaked out. It was full of water. And it's like, well, hold on. Why is it full of water? It's blocked. Well, okay, let's unblock it and then see, because you can't scope a sewer line well if it's full of water because it's all murky. So they bring somebody else in because the initial plumber that we had out, and this is us pros, half the team was like the house was going to burn down and we were going to have to drop the deal. And I woke up, I went to bed. It was like we found out at 5 o'clock, kind of wrapping up the day that it was full of water. And I'm like, well, heck, all right. I'm going to sleep on it. And we told the sellers, hey, your whole sewer main's full of water. Can you have it unplugged for us? And so they immediately, they have a lot of communities. So they went out with a plumber the next day. They were able to run a jetter and or a tool through and clean it out. Sewer drained. Turns out the sewer was in pretty good shape, but it had a couple of spots where the two joints of the main had popped loose over time, dirt moving and settling. And so long story short, there was a few sections that needed to be repaired. What we did, and I'd say what I've learned to do rather than freak out and ask for, the plumber that was there the day before said, oh, it's at least $500,000 to replace it. But he couldn't scope it because it was full of water, but he thought we'd have to totally replace the sewer. That was our context at the moment. So then next day we get better context. The sewer is drained now. It's unblocked. It's functioning properly. And when you look at it with a camera now that you can see, you see a few weak spots that long-term should be replaced. So I called the seller through the broker. We had a quick 3-way call. And I said, hey, is there any way you can fix these locations? Because those are problems that should be addressed really pretty much now. I mean, might as well. We know we've just identified exactly where the weak points are, where the sewer has pulled apart. And then there's a couple of clean outs that are missing that aren't dropping in correctly. Long story short, the guy took care of it all, paid for it all because he had a good plumber that gave him a fair rate. And he was appreciative of our approach to just negotiate by saying, hey, we don't need a discount as long as you're willing to go in and fix it. And since we were just kicking off our due diligence, was the first couple of weeks of due diligence, we had time in the contract. So he just had it fixed. He ended up fixing probably
$15,000.
No, he spent real money.
The section that had to be repaired cost $15,000.
Right. But then they found some other stuff and they ended up probably putting like $75,000 worth of sewer repairs because of our kind gesture to just bring it up and ask for him to fix it. And so he fixed it and it works great.
All of these situations, the point I'm trying to drive home is it was a lot less than $500,000.
Yes.
And another thing that we did right away was we brought out another plumbing vendor to do a secondary scope and give a second opinion, which was, this is in good shape. The repairs that they did were good and you're good to go. And so I think that that's one of those things where if you run into it where, you're new here, this is Jeff's Plumbing showed up and tells you that the sky is falling. Maybe you call David's Plumbing and get a secondary opinion just to make sure that it's not, somebody causing issues.
And that could have gone the other way.
For sure.
That could have, like, another plumber could have come out after it's unblocked or clogged. And they could have said, hey, this sewer is not functioning. It's riddled with cracks from trees and this and that. And so like it's old and it really should be replaced. We probably would have paid for a third just to like now because we had a garbage first opinion. Second opinion was better, but now it's like, okay, we got to double verify. So we would have probably had a third at that point because at that point, that's $500,000. And everybody that comes in, unless you find a sucker, somebody stupid to buy it, everyone's going to ask for that.
Yep.
So then that's a real conversation and one of those challenging due diligence calls you have to go through. And then I would still be like, hey, on our side, what makes sense? How much can we budget? And we'd kind of be doing that while I push for a $500,000 price reduction. And then, I'd always go for a reasonable, more friendly approach to just asking for a big number. That always offends people. So I say, hey, if you're in my shoes, what would you think is reasonable given the circumstance, given the deal, and given that I've had 3 people tell me that your sewer is shot. If you'd like, I can send you those reports. Now you come from a position of being honest about the whole scenario and you ask them how they'd like to go through it. So there's all these things where like I could preach good business practice here, but most of the time those guys respect you so much for bringing it up that way. Like I'd say calm, cool, collected through that process with data, with real expertise, that they'll work with you fully.
Yeah. Now, in this scenario where we're buying a 30 space community, and if this had happened, hopefully your problem's a lot less than $500,000, but it could be on.
It's probably 50 to 100 at least.
But it could be, if it's like full replacement and maybe they've been having issues for the last 5 years and trying to offload this park and didn't say anything, it blows the deal, and that's why,
30 unit deal, it could cost $500,000 to replace a utility. And so that's where you get into the economies of scale really increase as you grow, because $500,000 on a $15 million asset versus a $1 million asset is a big difference.
Yep.
And so it brings up a really good point. Like that's the more, it just gives you more reason to be extremely critical on the smaller deals.
Yep. And we've done it, for the record. We're not poking fun at anybody. We've actually experienced multiple times where even I just had a situation last week where a park where we had due diligence, we had a full report. There was a section 100 feet of Orangeburg that was missed when they had replaced it over time, and it failed. And it cost us about $20,000 to do the repairs. And it's just part of the business, but we've had them substantially bigger. We've had, big 6-figure repairs that were missed, even if we did our DD. So make sure you work hard on that. But anyways, we've now kind of gathered all the documents. We had our landlord tenant attorney give us everything that we needed to gather. We've got it. It all looks good. And we close this deal. So now we've closed our first deal, and now it's the takeover. Make sure you switch your utilities and start collecting rents. And that's pretty much it.
We glossed over like how to put the deal together with like the raising capital, or if you have money, but that's probably a completely different conversation on deal structure and how to put the economic deal together for investors versus operations. So it's a big ball of wax when you start from scratch.
Oh yeah.
So we'd encourage you to start looking at deals hard, making phone calls. There's no such thing as stupid questions. And you go to every industry event and just be a sponge, because there's attorneys, there's brokers, there's mortgage for like home lenders for manufactured housing, there's manufactured home builders, all like you just continue to learn, and everyone has some cool little nuggets of data, like on where, like we're learning Texas and Dallas, you can sell homes a lot better than you can in Arizona. Like it's not real clear why other than demand, right? But like for us, we continue to learn. I literally had a phone call today about insurance and how we can learn to improve our insurance game across our entire portfolio, learning from somebody that's come from a different space and, multifamily, and they've come from completely different concepts on how they operate their business. So just enjoy the process, enjoy learning, and go out there and start making some money.
And most importantly, do it.
Yeah. You gotta pull the trigger.
Pull the trigger. Don't sit and think for 5 years and figure out all these ways to find off market deals and want the unicorn that's perfect and has no issues. Do a deal. You have to do it, because we know a lot of people that sit around and tell us for years they're going to do deals, and they're still working the 9 to 5 and they're in the rat race.
And the best way to do it is to actually start. And like the first deal we did was a total butt kicker. I learned everything that you like, basically anything you could do wrong. I learned how to repair our way out of it, and in the end, we bought it for $600,000. We sold it for just under 1.4, and it was functioning well, and we resolved all the problems, and it was a good investment for the next guy. So then you look at it as like, okay, I've been entrusted with this, whether I've taken it on and maybe done some things and made a mistake on the fact that we bought it and now we're the responsible person for this, or the responsible party. You look at it as an opportunity to learn, grow, and become a steward of that asset and that property, and go out of your way to make it nice and function well, be a good rent collection, minimize expenses, and then you can sell it and it becomes marketable. And so we sold it, and it made a decent amount of money. It took 9, almost 10 years it over doubled in value. So it did really good on the equity. but it was not easy. It was not an easy 9.5 years.
No. And if I remember correctly, your guys's, and this will be for another day, but your subscription documents that was like your first iteration. And so I don't think you guys were even paid a cent on the back end.
We didn't make a single dime on that whole deal. So I'd call that like a good, cheap learning experience where we made a bunch of money for investors. We got paid a small management fee the whole time, 4% or whatever it was of gross collections. And so that's where, I'd say if you're just getting started, just know, like I was actually really fortunate in hindsight to be doing that at 18, 19, 20 years old was when we kicked that off. We were started to buy our first deal we bought our first deal in 2009. So I was 19 years old learning these things. So in hindsight, it's like magic because I started so young, and there's no better time to start than today.
Yep.
Because like it's just like planting a tree. It's like, well, if you didn't plant it yesterday, then today's the day, and you might as well get rolling, because these things are not a get rich quick scheme. You have to put in the work and the time, and then it just continues to get better because you get sharper and sharper, and you learn how to do it, what not to do and what to do. Yeah. Thanks for joining us on our first educational series of the CashFlow Quest. Cheers.
Later, guys.